the stranger at the door. The wind howled like a wounded beast, tearing through the mountain passes and slamming against the stone walls of the observatory. Marcelo Vega shivered despite the thick sweater he wore, his breath clouding before him. As he adjusted the telescope alignment for what felt like the 100th time that evening, the heating system struggled against the plummeting temperatures of the worst winter storm the mountains had seen in decades. Useless, he muttered, finally giving up as clouds smothered any chance of observing the meteor shower he'd been anticipating for months. 3 years at this remote observatory, and nature still found ways to frustrate his work. At 42, Marcelo had embraced solitude after his reputation in the academic world had been destroyed by false accusations of data manipulation. The Andean Observatory had become both his exile and sanctuary, a place where stars were more reliable companions than people had ever been. He closed the dome and descended the spiral staircase to the living quarters below, a converted stone building that had once housed generations of mountain shepherds before being repurposed for scientific study. The walls retained the chill no matter how much wood he fed into the ancient stove. The first knock was so faint that Marcelo mistook it for debris striking the window. The second knock, more desperate, pulled him from the star charts he'd been reviewing. Marcelo froze. No one came to the observatory during winter. The narrow mountain road became impassable after the first heavy snowfall, which had happened weeks ago. Supply deliveries wouldn't resume until spring. Another knock, weaker than the last. He approached the heavy wooden door cautiously, one hand reaching for the hunting knife he kept nearby. Not that trouble often found its way to this elevation, but isolation had taught him caution. "Who's there?" he called, voice rough from disuse. No answer came, only the mournful howling of the wind. Marcelo unbolted the door and pulled it open, bracing against the blast of snow and frigid air that immediately assaulted him. A figure collapsed inward, barely catching itself against the doorframe. Thin, trembling, covered in ice-crusted fabric unlike anything Marcelo had seen before. The stranger's head lifted, and Marcelo stepped back involuntarily, not human. The face that looked up at him had proportions almost but not quite right. Eyes too large and widely spaced, skin with a faint bluish undertone, and hair that seemed to shimmer with bioluminescent patterns when it caught the light. "Please," the stranger said, the word heavily accented but unmistakable. "Shelter." Marcelo stood frozen for a moment before his humanity overrode his shock. He reached forward to help the alien inside, closing the door against the howling storm. The creature, woman, was barely conscious, her skin frighteningly cold to the touch. Once inside, the stranger dropped to her knees with deliberate movement, then bowed her head and exposed her neck in what appeared to be a ritual gesture. "Shelter," she repeated, voice clearer now. "I offer payment." Her hands went to the clasp of her outer garment, and Marcelo suddenly understood with nauseating clarity what form of payment she was offering. "Stop," he said firmly, stepping back. "That's not necessary." The alien looked up, confusion evident in her expression. "It is custom. Shelter must be earned." Marcelo shook his head, a wave of sadness washing over him. "Not here. Not with me." He reached for a blanket draped over his reading chair and gently placed it around her shoulders. "You're freezing. Let's get you warm first." He guided her to the stove, stoked the fire, and filled his battered kettle with water for tea. The alien remained tense, watching his every move with wary eyes. "My name is Marcelo," he said, keeping his voice gentle. "This is an Earth research station, an observatory." "Observatory," she repeated, the word clearly familiar. "You watch stars?" "Yes." Marcelo nodded, surprised. "I study the stars. What's your name?" She hesitated. "Nyara. I am Nyara of the Valorian academic caste." "Academic? You're a scholar?" Something like pride flickered across her features. "I was, before the purge." Marcelo handed her a steaming mug, which she accepted with evident caution. She sniffed it, then took a tentative sip. "How did you get here, Nyara? We're miles from..." Anywhere habitable. Her shoulders tightened. Escape pod. Malfunctioned in your atmosphere. Landed wrong. She gestured vaguely toward the north. Walked 3 days. Saw light here. Marcelo tried to process this information. An alien refugee, walking through a blizzard after a spacecraft crash, finding the only inhabited building for 50 miles in any direction? The statistical improbability was staggering. "You're safe now," he said, the words feeling inadequate against whatever cosmic tragedy had brought her to his door. Nyara's luminescent eyes studied him. "Why help without payment? It is not logical." "Logic has nothing to do with it," Marcelo replied, stirring the stew he'd reheated. "You needed help, that's enough." "On my world, nothing is free," she said, her voice carrying a weight beyond exhaustion. "Everything must be earned or paid for, especially kindness." Marcelo filled a bowl with stew and placed it before her. "Earth has its flaws, but we try to help those in need when we can. At least that's what we aspire to." Nyara stared at the food, then back at him with lingering suspicion. "What will you want later?" The question twisted something inside Marcelo. What world had she come from, where even basic compassion came with expectations attached? "Nothing," he said firmly. "You owe me nothing, Nyara." She didn't appear to believe him, but hunger won over caution. She ate rapidly, as though afraid the food might be taken away. As the night deepened, Marcelo prepared the small guest room that hadn't seen use in years. He provided her with clean clothes, far too large but dry and warm. "Rest," he told her, showing her the simple bathroom, facilities, and how to operate the shower. "We'll figure things out tomorrow." At the doorway, Nyara paused. "Your people, do they all offer shelter without price?" Marcelo considered his answer carefully. "No," he admitted. "But many do. The best of us try." She nodded once, still uncertain. "Among my people, all transactions must balance. I am now in your debt." "You're not," Marcelo insisted. "There's no ledger here." That night, as the storm raged against the observatory walls, Marcelo lay awake thinking about the strange twist of fate that had brought an alien scholar to his door. He'd left humanity behind to find peace among the stars, only to have the stars deliver this unexpected visitor instead. In the room next door, Nyara too remained awake, her mind struggling to comprehend a worldview where kindness could be freely given. Such concepts were dangerous on her world, the kind of thinking that had started the academic purges. Yet here was this human, offering safety with no apparent motive. She didn't trust it, couldn't trust it. But for the first time in months, she allowed herself to close her eyes without fear of what might come with the dawn. Outside, the blizzard continued its assault. Unaware, it had pushed together two souls who had both, in their own ways, fallen from the heavens. Beyond the storm warning arrived with an eerie silence. The howling wind that had been their constant companion for days had finally ceased, leaving a stillness that felt almost unnatural. Marcelo awoke to find the observatory encased in a pristine blanket of snow that reached halfway up the ground floor windows. He moved quietly through his morning routine, stoking the fire and brewing coffee before checking on his unexpected guest. The door to the spare room stood ajar, the bed empty and neatly made. For a moment, panic seized him. Had she ventured outside? In these temperatures, that could be fatal. "Nyara," he called, moving quickly toward the main room. He found her standing, motionless, before the large window in the common area, gazing out at the transformed landscape. The rising sun cast an ethereal glow across the snow-covered mountains, turning the world into a canvas of pink and gold. Nyara's reflection in the glass showed an expression of wonder, her luminescent eyes wide as they tracked a pair of eagles soaring against the crystalline sky. "I've never seen such colors," she said without turning. "On Valoria, our skies are always amber, the chemical composition of our atmosphere." She trailed off, then added softly, "It's beautiful here." Marcelo approached slowly, not wanting to disturb her moment of peace. "Coffee?" he offered, extending a steaming mug. She accepted it with both hands, her long fingers wrapping gratefully around the warmth. The oversized clothes she wore, his old university sweatshirt and a pair of thermal pants rolled several times at the ankles, made her look oddly vulnerable, less alien. "The communication system is still down," he informed her, sipping his own coffee. "Storm must have damaged the satellite receiver. I tried the emergency radio, but there's only static." Nyara nodded, seeming unsurprised. "Your technology is primitive, though perhaps more reliable than ours in some ways." "Primitive?" Marcello couldn't help but smile. "I suppose it would seem that way to someone who arrived in a spacecraft." "A damaged spacecraft," she corrected, her tone darkening. "One not meant for atmospheric entry." Marcello leaned against the window frame, studying her. In the daylight, he could see more clearly the iridescent patterns that traced her hairline and continued down her neck, disappearing beneath the collar of the sweatshirt. They pulsed faintly with her heartbeat. "Yesterday you mentioned a purge," he said carefully. "What happened, Nyara?" She was quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the mountain landscape. When she finally spoke, her voice was measured, controlled. "I was part of the astronomical division at the Central Knowledge Repository. My research focused on identifying habitable exoplanets, worlds beyond our system where our people might expand." She set the mug down on the windowsill. 3 cycles ago, I discovered evidence that contradicted our government's claims about our sun's stability. My calculations showed early signs of irregular solar activity, nothing immediately catastrophic, but concerning for our long-term survival. Marcello recognized the familiar tension in her voice, the tone of a scientist whose findings had become politically inconvenient. "The High Council declared the research treasonous," she continued. "Information that might cause societal distress was classified as dangerous. My colleagues and I were branded as disruptors." Her hand moved unconsciously to her side where Marcello suspected she carried unseen wounds. "Some were publicly executed, as examples. Others disappeared into detention facilities. I escaped because a council member, a friend from my early academic years, warned me hours before the arrest orders were issued." Marcello felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. "I'm sorry," he said inadequately. Nyara turned to face him fully. "You understand what it means to be silenced for speaking truth, don't you? I see it in your eyes." The observation struck uncomfortably close. "My situation was different," he replied. "Less dramatic. A research controversy, accusations of falsified data. I was cleared eventually, but my reputation—" He shrugged. "Careers in academia don't survive that kind of scrutiny." "So you came here, to exile yourself among the stars." "I prefer to think of it as cutting out the middleman," Marcello said with a wry smile. "Just me and the universe without committees or funding boards in between." A sudden mechanical groan interrupted their conversation as the lights flickered, once, twice, then went out completely. The steady hum of the heating system died, leaving only the crackling of the wood stove. "Power's gone," Marcello sighed. "The backup generator should kick in, but—" He was interrupted by a thunderous rumble from outside. They both rushed to the window just in time to see an enormous cascade of snow and ice sliding down the mountainside above the observatory. The avalanche missed the main building but tore through the auxiliary structure that housed the generator and equipment storage. "That's not good," Marcello said quietly. Throughout the day, they worked together to secure what they could. The observatory had been designed to withstand extreme weather, but not complete isolation without power. The wood stove would provide heat for the main room, but the temperature in the rest of the building was already dropping rapidly. Nyara proved surprisingly capable in the crisis. Her analytical mind quickly grasped their situation, and she methodically helped Marcello move essential supplies to the central living area. They pushed furniture against the walls, creating a smaller, more easily heated space near the stove. "Efficient," Marcello commented as she arranged reflective emergency blankets to maximize heat reflection. "You've done this before." "Survival. Training is mandatory for all Valorian citizens," she explained, securing the blanket with clips she'd fashioned from wire. "Our climate is harsh and unpredictable." By evening, they had transformed the main room into a functional living space. Marcelo inventoried their supplies while Niara studied the building schematics he'd retrieved from a filing cabinet. "We have enough food for about 3 weeks if we're careful," he reported. "Water isn't a problem, we can melt snow. The real issue is heat. I have enough firewood for maybe 10 days. Niara looked up from the blueprints. "The observatory dome," she said, tapping the paper. "Its emergency manual operation system. Does it still function?" Marcelo nodded. "It's mechanical. Doesn't need electricity. Why? If we close it completely, we could better insulate that level. And..." She hesitated. "My people have engineered biostructures that generate heat through cellular processes. I might be able to create something similar with materials here, but I would need tools, certain chemicals." Marcelo stared at her. "You're talking about synthesizing a biological heating system? From scratch?" A flash of uncertainty crossed her features. "On my world, I would have proper equipment. Here, it would be improvised. I have a basic lab setup," Marcelo said slowly. "Nothing fancy, but there's analytical equipment, microscopes, some chemicals for maintenance." Hope flickered in her luminescent eyes. "Show me." The following days blurred together in a haze of cold and determined work. Niara spent hours in the small lab, combining chemicals and organic materials in configurations that defied Marcelo's understanding of biology. He assisted as best he could, following her instructions and marveling at the ingenuity of her approach. Meanwhile, their conversations deepened. In the evenings, huddled near the stove for warmth, they exchanged stories of their worlds. Niara described the massive crystal spires of Valorian cities, the binary sunset that painted the sky in layers of crimson and gold, the annual festival of knowledge where new discoveries were celebrated with music and light displays. Marcelo shared tales of Earth's diversity, deserts and rainforests, metropolises and remote villages, the countless cultures and traditions that had evolved across a single planet. He showed her his collection of books explaining how human knowledge was preserved and transmitted across generations. On the fourth night, as a fresh snowstorm battered the observatory, Niara emerged from the lab with triumph in her eyes and a glass container in her hands. Inside, a gelatinous substance pulsed with a soft blue glow, emanating tangible warmth. "Worked," she said, her voice tinged with disbelief and pride. "It's crude compared to our standard technology, but the biomatrix is stable. It should provide heat for at least 2 weeks before requiring nutrient replenishment." Marcelo stared at the gently pulsing creation. "This is incredible," he murmured. "You basically invented a new life form." "Not quite," she corrected. "It's a semi-organic compound that mimics certain metabolic processes, but it isn't alive, not by either of our definitions." They placed the containers strategically throughout their living space. By morning, the temperature had risen noticeably, creating a pocket of warmth that defied the bitter cold outside. "We might actually survive this," Marcelo said, only half joking as he prepared their breakfast from dwindling supplies. Niara looked up from the star chart she'd been studying. "Did you doubt it? Considering our situation?" "Yes, honestly." He handed her a bowl of reconstituted oatmeal. "But you've turned impossible odds in our favor." She accepted the food with a small nod. "On Valoria, we have a saying, knowledge transforms survival into living. Without your observatory, your supplies, your willingness to help, my knowledge would have been useless." A comfortable silence fell between them as they ate. Marcelo noticed that Niara no longer flinched when their hands accidentally touched, no longer watched him with constant suspicion. Something had shifted between them, a fragile trust building like the layers of snow outside. Later that day, as they worked together to reinforce one of the windows against the increasing pressure of accumulated snow, Niara suddenly stumbled, her hand flying to her side as she gasped in pain. Marcelo caught her before she could fall. "What's wrong?" She tried to straighten, her face contorting with effort. "Nothing. Just an old injury." But when Marcelo helped, Her to the couch, he noticed the dark stain spreading across her side, seeping through the sweatshirt. "You're bleeding," he said, alarm sharpening his voice. "Let me see." After a moment's hesitation, Niara carefully lifted the edge of the sweatshirt, revealing a partially healed wound along her ribcage. The edges glowed faintly with the same luminescence as the patterns on her skin, but the center had reopened, leaking fluid with a bluish tint. "This isn't from the crash, is it?" Marcelo asked quietly, already reaching for the first aid kit. Niara's eyes met his, no longer guarded. "No," she admitted. "It happened during my escape. The guard who fired, he was someone I had once taught, a former student." As Marcelo carefully cleaned and dressed her wound, using the limited medical supplies available, Niara watched his gentle movements with an expression of wonder. "In all my studies of other civilizations," she said softly, "I never truly understood what your kind calls compassion. On my world, such care would only be given to those of equal or higher status, or in exchange for future favor. Is that why you offered yourself when you first arrived?" Marcelo asked, securing the bandage. "Because you expected to have to pay for help?" She nodded slowly. "It is our way. Everything must balance. A transaction." Her hand covered his where it rested on the bandage. "But you're teaching me there can be another way." Outside, the storm continued its assault, but inside their makeshift sanctuary, something new was taking root. A connection that transcended the vast differences between their worlds. A shared understanding that perhaps the most valuable exchanges couldn't be measured or balanced on any ledger. As night fell and they sat side by side before the stove, watching the flames dance, Niara leaned slightly against Marcelo's shoulder, a small gesture of trust that spoke volumes. In that moment, surrounded by endless winter and uncertain future, they had found in each other something neither had expected. Not just shelter from the storm, but a place where both their hearts could begin to heal.